Welcome to the Weekly Workplace Podcast, your hub for leveling up your workplace skills with a journey to success that's anything but boring. Get ready to ditch the dull and dive into the dynamic. Imagine high fives and fist bumps for triumphing over frontline challenges and confetti cannons for nailing your leadership goals. Our episodes feature interviews with industry game changers, spicy tips from trailblazing pros, and mind-blowing techniques to turn you into the office superhero you were meant to be. So, whether you're rocking the cubicle life or leading from the corner office, grab your cape and get ready to soar to new heights with the Weekly Workplace.
Welcome to the Weekly Workplace, where professionals come to find insights and inspiration for success. With you again today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Hello.
everybody. Hello.
Missouri Training Institute, Dewey Thompson, Ray Lyon, and myself.
Yeah.
Did I get the grammar right there?
No, and me.
Dang it. We're going to keep working on that. And me, Bryana Larimer.
Don't you have a degree in journalism?
Yeah, but do you think I paid attention in the grammar class? No. Well, it is exciting to be back with you all again today. And just to own kind of our setup, if you're watching us on YouTube, we hope you are. Check out our playlist there. So I would be sitting too, but there's too much to man here. So I feel a little strange kind of towering over you all, but
oh, you tower over us all the time, Bryana.
Stop. No.
You do things so much better than us anyway.
Not at all. But I'm glad y'all are comfortable. We got a good camera set up. We'd love your feedback on the video podcast component. Do you like it? Is it something that you're watching, or are you truly just still listening? So that helps us and is valuable for us as we plan forward. So today, if you've been following along with us, we have been in the 6 types of working genius. We broke down last week the genius of invention. Miss Ray really drove home some key components there. And so today we're going to be on the 3rd working genius, the genius of discernment. There happens to be 2 folks on our team here that has this genius. So just to kind of remind our folks out there, when we talk about the genius of discernment, that's really going to be the person who, it's the first stage, the first genius of the activation stage. And they're taking all of the ideas that came from the inventors, and they are now and the wonders, right? And they're now saying, let me help you make this better. So they're really kind of diluting the ideas down, thinking through all of these complex issues, the people, the circumstances, the situations, all of it to decide like what would be the best path forward. They work out of a lot of intuition. And so Dewey and I have the genius of discernment. Dewey, let me ask you, how else would you define discernment?
Well, I like the word that you used called intuition because you know, Ray, before we were getting on, Ray was asking me a question about this, and I'm like, I don't have a specific moment where I can say that this is how I know that I have this genius. It's just my usual approach, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a lot about that decision-making by intuition. Yeah. I think. So that's how I would kind of take a look at it.
For me, it's hard to put words to it.
It is.
Like you can't
just know.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't explain it. And sometimes, well, a lot of times I can be wrong, right? We can still be wrong too. But the reality is like when folks ask you, can you put the data or the logic or anything behind it? I can't always do that. Mm-hmm. It's hard.
Sometimes it's just a feeling, you know? Yeah. But I will say it's usually my approach anyway. I can't speak for you, but it causes me to have, I think, a longer term perspective of things. You know, I'm always thinking in the long term, not necessarily what the short gain might be tomorrow, but what's that going to look like in, you know, a year from now or 2 years or whatever it might be. And I think it causes me to be a little bit more strategic. So
what's interesting, so as you said that, and Ray, I know you have some questions you want to get to with us here, but I'm picking up here what you just said actually is a perfect explanation of your discernment and wonder together, because mine is the exact opposite. So mine is like tomorrow. What are we getting done by tomorrow? And how do we achieve that by tomorrow or even this week or maybe this month? But chances are it's just tomorrow. And that's my second genius is actually enablement. So you and I are on 2 different levels there, but we look at it through the same lens of discernment. So very interesting.
Yeah.
Ray, what's the experience like working with 2 discerners?
Yeah, because isn't this a frustration for yours?
No,
it's
actually.
a competency, right?
It's a competency.
Oh,
so
good.
I guess when we say competency, it's something I've learned, right? Either through work or just life experiences to do this or enact this idea of discernment, which to me means decision-making, making a choice from the options that are there. So it's not a frustration, but I think sometimes on both spectrums, for me, the and I don't even know if frustration is the right word, so help me with a more gentle word, less intense, is this takes a long time and this doesn't take long enough.
And if you're only listening,
yeah.
She pointed at me when she said this takes a long time.
That's right.
And the other side was she's pointing at Bryana when this doesn't take long enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And so honestly, I feel like the balance is not to get overwhelmed by the vision and the outlook, or not jump the gun too quickly, right? Which I know you like to get things done, but I'm not sure that your discernment really inhibits. I don't know that it promotes that immediacy that you're talking about. Maybe you feel it, but I certainly think you balance it, and both of you do, but balance that like get it done today with what's the best decision I need to make today for tomorrow or the next day or longevity.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely is still, it's like a shorter point of time. It's like, I can't think a year down the road. We did strategic planning like a few years ago.
A couple years.
And I was just like, I can't do that. Like I'm thinking about what's going to happen by next month. I'm lucky.
But I will say this though, but in those moments when we are just discussing an issue, you do like to ask lots of questions.
I do.
You know, and so there's an example of that discernment coming out, even though it might not be, tomorrow, but you do ask a lot of questions.
It's funny because I was thinking about our t-shirts. If we ever created like t-shirts for ourselves and what our like motto or our logo or whatever would be as it relates to our genius. And it was, let me ask you something. Like that's my question. Always, every interview you think about we've done, I always
got a minute.
Yeah, let me ask you something.
Wait, a Dewey minute or a Ray minute?
So, Ray, let me ask you also as we kind of think through the discernment component. I feel like we've had conversations before, and I love that you brought this to my attention because you said one time that there was a big difference between reflecting on something and ruminating on something. And that spoke wonders to me because I guess I had never really distinguished the two. But help me understand like how you got to that and how you saw that operating in me.
Yeah.
It might be a component of this discernment.
Both of them, I think, in the context that we were using them was talking about something that had happened in the past. And so the reflection for me is understanding what happened and then the idea of what should I be learning from this or what is this trying to teach me? So reflection in order to move forward. Ruminating keeps you in that moment and you replay it hoping something different would result or did result. And so that ruminating really does get people stuck and just kind of perhaps in that negative, most often because it's human nature to stay in that negative loop, right? That just kind of grinds you down. So reflection is used as a like, what am I learning from this or what is this teaching me right now? Ruminating is keeping you in that moment over and over and over.
The reason why I ask that, because I think it was a very important distinction to make between the two is because sometimes, and I don't know, Dewey, if you feel this too, but I feel like I'm stuck with like what we're going to call analysis paralysis. Like I just sit and work over something time and time and time again until it eats away at me.
Yeah. I take medication for it. No, just but it's it can slow us down quite a bit, this idea of discernment, because I want to make sure that the decision we're making is the right course of action, of course. Yeah. So, I'm all for bringing some data. I'm all for doing some research. I'm all for, trying to figure out what other people's ideas are. And is there a way that we can kind of combine that? But that just means I have to be discerned. I have to practice that discernment with everybody, and so it can kind of slow things down.
Yeah, and discernment is the act of deciding, right? It's the act of taking multiple options. So we're in that middle space of now we've idealized it, and now it's which one of those ideas then are we picking? And to hear you say that you analyze, you want to make the right decision, quote. And again, who gets to choose that, right? Who's the owner of what's right? And in Bryana's case, how I see it is, and I know you already know this, but that perfectionist tendency that
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
that it's not enough. There's always something to tweak, and so that's where I feel like your analysis paralysis
Yes.
comes in. But that's from that objective, because I'm not tied to what it is that you're discerning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It certainly, I'm glad you brought that up because I would agree with that. My perfectionism it stands in the way a lot of times of being able to truly unleash
Mm-hmm.
this genius. Because you're right. It is the act of making a decision. And I just had this conversation with my husband yesterday. We, had the whole plan on what we were going to do with our son in preschool and all of this again. And then future focused thinking with middle school, high school, all that. That's how far out I do think in those cases. And he's like, would you stop rethinking it and rethinking it and rethinking it? And I think even on our team, you all have seen that where we have decisions that I'll make and then I'll come back and be like, actually, let's do this. Actually, let's do this. Because it's the
Oh,
perfectionism.
yeah.
It doesn't feel perfect yet. Oh.
That's hilarious.
But there's a lot of power in this genius.
Yeah.
I feel that. And so Ray, I guess is from a third party perspective on that. And you think about just what Dewey and I bring to the table. What is that power of discernment on the team?
The power is seeing beyond what just the evidence, shows us. And I think relying on, you might not be able to see it, but you can feel it. And wherever that intuition's coming from, if it's coming from your head or if it's coming from your heart or it's coming from your gut, I think we have multiple types of intelligences in that intuition space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would definitely say your intuition for both of you comes from different places, but it's still that knowing without having empirical evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And what I love that you do, both of you do this when we think about how do you support it as a team member, right? Obviously, it's a competency for you, Ray, and I've worked on other teams where, it's competencies or even frustrations for some, but really what I value is the opportunity to be able to engage in dialogue about where that feeling is coming from or where that thought is coming from.
You have to give space to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say knowing that, and if you're dealing with other team members, knowing that particular type of analysis paralysis, whatever, flavor it comes in, can stall. Mm-hmm. I think, giving space to it, but then also setting some expectations for how long we're going to discern.
How long are we going to be here before we move on?
Before Ray's already done it, and now it's in the rear view mirror. But,
yes.
It really is setting those up front.
Mm-hmm.
What does our time frame look like? What are some of those expectations for discussion? How are we going to discuss it?
Yeah. And some of that is different for me, depending on what it is we're talking about.
Right.
If we've got some really big, important decision, you can bet I'm going to take my sweet time about it. If it's something that's not so, earth-shatteringly, going to have such a big impact, then let's try things, right? And move on those a little quicker. So I think it all kind of depends on what it is, what kind of decision we're making.
Yeah. And you're really good about, pushing those decisions down to the people it impacts the most. So if it's not a Dewey only discernment, it's just kind of like, I trust you to make that decision and it's off your plate.
Right. Right.
If it's bigger, we're all looped in, and then we find space for that. So you're really good at it.
Yeah, so just hire smart people.
Well, and I love, I think one of the things, and we've asked this on the last couple of episodes too, that idea of what do you crave out of this genius and kind of what crushes you? So Dewey, if I asked you that in particular, what would that be?
Well, what I crave about it is understanding. And so I like, and here comes my connectedness from my Clifton strengths, but I like to understand how everything kind of comes together to inform a situation or a problem and all the little things that go into that problem. And so that is what I crave, is wanting to understand how things work, because I think you really can't make a decision on how to improve something until you really kind of first understand all the little moving parts of it. But beyond that, boy, I can make a connection to almost anything, you know? So it's like Ray said, when is enough?
Yeah.
Before I just get so paralyzed and not moving forward.
Yeah.
That's the part that really gets me, that challenges me.
Yeah. When I first looked at this and read this description, and I think of like, what do I need to really unleash this space? I love trust in that. Like, because I said earlier, I can't explain where it's coming from. And I use that language with everyone that I talk to. Like, I can't tell you, it's just a feeling. And so if you can just trust me and maybe we can try it and see what happens, that's something I think I crave a lot, is that space of trust. Because I'm usually crushed by that concept of like, prove it. And that's more from, I think you operate a lot in the discernment space through the logic component. I operate a lot of it. And you mentioned it earlier, through the heart strength, through the heart component, the emotions component. And I just can't put tangible evidence to that all the time. So it becomes difficult. Ray, what questions do you have for us?
Well, you're doing a great job interviewing yourself.
We're discerning.
I'm so excited. And then I was like, she just can't help herself. It's so natural for her. It's so wonderful. I think about it, from the perspective of, if we were talking to teams right now and we could give them, advice about how best to work in this space. So from the point of regulation, if this is an area that, you have a genius in, all the way to the point of how teams can work with that. What do you need from your teammates, I think would be my question. And, how do you regulate?
Okay. Well, two big questions there, I think. What I need from team members is sometimes patience. I also need team members to bring me data. I want them to know their stuff. If you're going to, like Bryana, bring me a gut instinct intuition, I am going to want a little facts to back it up, that kind of thing. So I think doing your research is important when you're working with somebody who has this particular genius of discernment. The other thing that I will say about this that I need from my team members with this is creativity. And sometimes I think that gets really squashed a lot in work and that kind of thing. But the reason I am always asking questions and trying to discern is to try to come up with some real creative, innovative solution to problems. And I that's what I love, is like, we're taking these ideas and we're thinking, okay, which one's going to work? Which one's not going to work? Which one's going to get us closest? Which one's going to get us the biggest impact with the lowest lift, or things like that. And so, I need that creativity. So when we're discussing things and we're asking questions to really understand the problem, hopefully the solution then starts to emerge, right? That creativity can really start to emerge. So that's what I need from team members with this particular thing. But patience is going to be probably my number one. What do you need, Bryana?
Yeah. I think we touched a little bit earlier on that open dialogue component. I think the communication is key. I feel like I always can have some type of contribution as a discerner. So if you're just making a decision without, having a conversation with me, where I feel like at least you're trying to get some of my perspective or valuing that particular genius, like in feedback sessions, right? So evaluation spaces, or even like when we were doing curriculum designs, right? We'd sit and we'd have the conversations about it. I just love constant communication, because I feel like that allows me the opportunity to try and express where my train has headed and why I'm thinking the way I have. And so there's got to be the connection too, though. Like, if I'm sitting in a space, I'll tell you that whole prove it, component I mentioned earlier. If I'm in a space where there is a lot of logic-based thinking versus thinking about the implications on a person or the societal complications, or it goes so deep, and it's usually related around people and experiences and all of that versus just what the data is saying. Sometimes I get I get bogged down, I think, in that. And so for me, I just need understanding that sometimes what I'm going to say might sound a little off the cuff, might not be in direct alignment with business operations, or might not be in direct alignment with logic, but it's just I'm thinking about people in all of those areas too. And I think that that's probably the biggest space when I consider discernment that I operate out of. My background's in public relations, so it's always getting in the minds of other people and how things are going to possibly affect.
Well, certainly, I think that's an important component when you're trying to make a decision. Any decision that how is it going to affect folks?
Mm-hmm.
How is it going to affect the team? How's it going to affect your customers? How's it going to affect the organization? And I think that's a very important component. But that's emotional intelligence too coming through right there.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that.
Yeah,
I think of that a lot too.
Yeah.
And that's part of the regulating part of
It
that
is.
question. Then is
Yes, that the awareness component, right? So like I have to be able to regulate enough to realize what table I'm sitting at right now and who's around this table and what matters to them in this space. And so having that level of awareness based off of how I can essentially read the room and know when I'm going to have to, it's not my place, right? I'm to tap out in that. So as much as I like to communicate, I don't always need to have something to say. And so I think that does require a level of awareness when we're talking about regulation and boundaries. I got to be willing to set those boundaries and kind of limit the time that I'm spending evaluating ideas. I feel horrible sometimes in our NELD meetings. I feel like I sometimes take the wind out of the sails because it will say something new. And I'm like, well, what about this though with it? And it's just this constant kind of back and forth. And I'm like, Bryana, just stop talking. And so I stopped talking. Sometimes. But
I was going to say, when was that?
Sometimes.
Just joking.
Assertiveness is very high for me on emotional intelligence. So, but what about you, Dewey? Any other ways or any other tips for regulating discernment?
I really have to be careful. I think a lot of it's that self-awareness piece. I have to be careful because it's going to take way too much time, that kind of thing. So awareness is going to be important. The other thing I would say is partner yourself with a galvanizer, somebody who can get it going, right? But I love having that on our team, right? Because that's kind of the yin and the yang, you know, and I think that really kind of helps us kind of how we're going to move forward together.
Yeah, there was actually some questions that we've come up with here as we're thinking through each of these geniuses. But when you're thinking about ways to determine if your genius is kind of getting in your way, so we're going to talk specifically about discernment here. The very first one, am I spending too much time evaluating options instead of taking action? All right. Number 2, have I sought input from others versus solely relying on my own judgment? And that's important.
I try to do that a lot. That is one thing that I really, really try to do. But again, that can slow me down because I'm thinking, I need to get this person's ideas. I need to understand it and run it by this person, see what they think about it. You know, and so that can kind of slow me down once in a while. But I think it's important to gather all that up.
And see, I know that I do not do as good of a job in that because my enabler says just get it done. And so it's like, okay, I feel like I'm comfortable with my idea and now I just want to push forward. And I think that doesn't contribute very well overall to obviously a team, right? We got to all be in it together. And so it's cool that we can see opposite ends of the spectrum here and how one genius mixed with another one can look different. Am I considering practical constraints or realities? Am I getting lost on theoretical possibilities?
Guilty.
Yeah, my question often has been in the not just YouTube, but when somebody has that many questions, is like, what is the likelihood that's actually going to happen? Because my next thing is, if it did, would you be able to handle it? And 99.9% of the time, it's not likely to happen. But if it did, I'd absolutely be able to cope. And I'm like, then what's stopping you?
Yeah.
So hearing you say that, and I won't give away too much of it, but our family just went and saw Inside Out 2. There is a very vivid scene in there that depicts exactly what you just said. And it correlates with a certain emotion. So I won't give that away too much, but that idea of always preparing and planning for every single situation that can practically happen and what it does to the human body.
Yeah. We deal with that a lot in coaching.
Yeah. So what other questions do you have, Ray?
Well, we've always been told got to have the backup plan, right? I mean, we've been kind of brought up that way. What's your backup plan? What's your backup plan? What's your backup plan? So it doesn't surprise me that we can think too much about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Every little contingency.
It is. It is. What else you got for us?
Oh my gosh. I'm going down my list and it really looks like we've touched on just about everything.
Dewey, other thoughts?
Well, I think that there are some things that people can do that might, if this is something they struggle with a little bit. I think there's some other things because, I think we've all been taught to really bring brainstorming to a halt very, very quickly. And so I'm not so much for that kind of approach. So I like it when people ask why, and the other main question I love is when people ask what if, because I think those can really help us kind of think about different directions that we can go with almost any decision we need to make. And the final thing I'd say is, I love it when people say yes and rather than yeah but. You know what I mean? Because that's just more information to discern through, right? To make a better decision. So just some tips.
Yeah. I think when I think of tips in that space too, for me, and I'll just get a little vulnerable on the show. I always grew up kind of eating at the same restaurants, meeting with the same people, doing all the same things, and didn't really expand my perspectives. So I had a very narrow scope of what I thought was reality. Seeking diverse perspectives, I think, is really important if you're trying to enhance your discernment capabilities. You got to kind of sharpen that intuition component, and you can only do that through exposure and experience to others. And so that was important. And then I do still reflect. I think that people should reflect in whatever way that looks like for you. So if it's journaling or if it's reflecting, I'm an extrovert, so I process out loud a lot. And so there's times where the conversation is just me honestly reflecting out loud to people around me. Sorry, team. And but I think that that's also important is you're kind of trying to, again, sharpen just that intuition. And did I get it right? And if I didn't get it right there, then, what was I thinking, or trying to kind of get back into that space. Analytical skills are also important though.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like puzzles, Dewey?
I love puzzles.
Yeah.
I love puzzles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a new renowned appreciation for puzzles now as a mom.
I especially like those 3D puzzle things that you can buy. You just got to try to figure out how to get these two things apart or something like that. I love those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Great stocking stuffers too.
They
Christmas.
They are. But really keep learning, right? If you just keep learning, think of some of those critical thinking exercises. And this is probably why I love generative AI so much right now, is because I don't look at it just as a tool where you can input question, get answer out most of the time. I think that it's so fun to think critically about some of the responses or the outputs it's giving, and then how can I reframe that and maybe get something different, or how do I look at that a different way now? And so I think those would be some tips I'd probably give others too, is just explore in that space. Yeah. Definitely explore.
Read.
Yeah. You said that on your wonder show.
They kind of go to hand in hand, don't they? You wonder about something and then you got to discern it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll say one final thing. And you mentioned earlier the impact of questions. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, and this maybe goes back to the journalism background too, but it is always making sure that you're asking the right questions. So I've met people sometimes that will plan out, we'll just say an interview, for example, they'll plan out the entire interview and just go question by question, not actually listening to any of the responses or altering questions based off of what you're hearing. Mm-hmm. Or when you're sitting in a space with leadership, thinking again about who am I in front of? What's the audience? What questions should I be asking here versus maybe what I want to know? Get comfortable with understanding what the right questions might be given the circumstance. Well, any final thoughts with our last minute or two here as we wrap up? Ray or Dewey?
Just if you want to really sharpen this particular genius, I just encourage you to learn, to read, be one of those lifelong learners.
Ray, working with discerners? Any final
Set a
thoughts?
time limit.
There you go. There you go.
Set a time limit, get a process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are getting ready to head in next week then, and we're going to be focusing back on Miss Ray again, because one of the things you mentioned earlier, Dewey, is you said, if you're a discerner, get yourself a galvanizer, right? Because the idea is these two kind of go hand in hand in that stage of work that we call activation. This stage of work comes after the ideation stage, which is that wonder and invention genius. And so next week, we're going to focus all about our galvanizers and really kind of getting some experiences from Ray as we recognize the importance of now we've diluted the decision down. How do we rally the troops around the idea and get the actual movement forward to something tangible? And so we will be back next week. We encourage any questions or comments that you might have related to this. Send them to us at mti@missouri.edu. And until next time,
Go be great.
And that's a wrap, folks. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Weekly Workplace. We hope you've been inspired, equipped, and ready to tackle whatever challenges come your way. But before you go, remember, the journey to success never stops. Keep grinding, keep growing, and keep striving for greatness. And hey, if you want to stay ahead of the game and never miss an episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you thought of today's show. Your feedback fuels our fire. Also, show us some love by liking and sharing this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and fellow go-getters. Together, let's spread the knowledge and empower more professionals to reach their full potential. For even more tools and resources to elevate your career, check out the Missouri Training Institute. So until next time, keep hustling, keep learning, and keep dominating the workplace.